Every single year, I switch to an iPhone from an Android phone. And every single year after a few weeks, I just cannot stand being on iOS and I want to switch back to Android. I'm here to tell you that this year, with this phone right here, the iPhone SE 2020, my whole life has completely changed because now I don't want to switch back to Android. This phone might have finally convinced me to stay on iOS permanently. I'm Alex with Tech, and this is our full review of the Apple iPhone SE 2020. So you're probably asking, why is this year any different than previous years? Last year's iPhone XR was also a very good phone, and I purchased it and I reviewed it as well on the channel, gave it pretty good reviews. But here's the reason why. I am a small phone lover, and over the years I have constantly been searching for a good small phone to kind of be a successor to the Sony compact line. We haven't really had a good Android small phone in quite a long time. Phones are getting bigger and bigger, and Apple actually kind of stepped in with the iPhone SE in 2016, if I believe it was 2016. So when Apple kind of had this whole thing that they were going to relaunch the iPhone SE 2 and all the rumors going around, I was really excited about it. Even though this phone is essentially a repackaged iPhone 8, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because the price point is $399. And if you follow this channel, you know I am a huge bargain hunter. I'm constantly looking for the best deal you can possibly get for what you pay for. Like, we just love good valued phones. And this thing is the king of good valued phones. I absolutely cannot stress that enough. There's no phone out there in the world right now at this current time that offers you better value. And this is an Apple product. Look how crazy that sounds. In 2020, the best valued phone on the market is an Apple product. Just a couple years ago, we were saying Apple products were all overpriced, and they are overpriced. You do get quality, you get certain things with Apple products. That's always been the case. But in terms of good value, this phone is cheaper than Xiaomi's and OnePlus's and Samsung's. That's pretty crazy to think about. So we're going to talk about different aspects about why this phone is actually really good. So the first thing we got to talk about is the processor, because the reason this phone is so competitive on the market is because of the processor. The processor that is housed in this tiny little body is a A13 Bionic chip, which is the flagship processor from the iPhone 11 last year. So yeah, it's last year's flagship processor. We don't have the iPhone 12 yet, so it still is the best mobile processor from Apple. How great is that? $399, you can get the best mobile processor in an iPhone, brand new. I mean, just think about that. That is insane. Yes, it only has 3 gigabytes of RAM for this model and 64 gigabytes of storage. That sounds ridiculously low for any type of phone, but if we know anything about Apple, which we do, we've seen in history that Apple phones, the RAM, it doesn't really matter. We are literally almost at that point where we have triple the RAM on flagship Android phones. And this iPhone SE still performs better, if not the same, as those flagship Android phones with 3 gigabytes of RAM. This phone is buttery smooth because it runs iOS 13 and it has the A13 Bionic chip. That combination, because Apple's software and hardware mesh together, it's a winning combination. And it's hard to fathom for a lot of people who just look at specs, because 3 gigabytes of RAM, that's not a lot of RAM. We have triple the amount of RAM nowadays in Android phones. Some phones do have that much RAM. And this can compete with basically any phone out there in terms of everyday performance. And that's crazy. This is $399 starting point. You're going to hear me say $399 so many times because that is the mind-blowing thing about this phone. It's $399. Now, it's not necessarily all good. Performance, while great, I do still get some apps that crash and lock up sometimes. That's normal for every single phone, even Apple phones. I get that for brand new Apple phones as well. However, the one little aspect here that you may be able to knock this phone on is the display. So yes, I know it's $399, but the display is still 720p. We have a 4.7-inch 750 by 1334p display. It's 16 by 9 aspect ratio, so not the elongated, longer aspect ratios a lot of phones have nowadays. And it only has 326 ppi. PPI count is pretty low. It's only a 4.7-inch phone. Because of the 16 by 9 too, we don't have the compacted pixels. So when you look at it that way, the numbers are low here. But once again, Apple displays are relatively good. Colors are very true tone, and viewing experiences are good. The viewing angles are great. However, I mean, under 1080p now for any modern smartphone is kind of, I don't know. Like, a lot of people probably won't notice it, but I personally feel like 1080p displays, we could have popped it up there. We could have just did that. I mean, the Sony compact lines have done that for years too. So it is kind of sad that this is not a 1080p display. But at the same time, viewing experiences are fine. Colors are fine. So it is acceptable, and it is $399. But I would have liked to see a 1080p display. Because this is a reuse design from the iPhone 8, that means we see a return of Touch ID and no Face ID. So one thing I didn't like about the iPhone XR is that there was no fingerprint scanner and that we strictly had to use Face ID. And while Face ID has been good on Apple products, there are certain scenarios where I prefer using a fingerprint scanner. And this phone, with its return of the fingerprint scanner, this is what you expect from previous generation Apple phones. The fingerprint scanner is top-notch, very quick. It's very responsive and very secure, and I very much appreciate having this fingerprint scanner back in my life. It did take me a little bit of time to get used to having a home button again, because I haven't used a phone with a home button in quite a long time. But the fact that it is here, you quickly do remember the muscle memory after a couple days. And, you know, it's kind of funny because for $399, you kind of learn to adapt to things. And things I would have complained about on other phones, like the pretty big bezels. We do have pretty giant bezels on this phone compared to newer phones that don't have bezels anymore in 2020. I'm okay with that. $399 for the package that we do have. It's a weird thing. The other thing I am really impressed with, and this is kind of strange for me to say too, 1821 milliamp hour battery. Think about that. 1,821 milliamp hour battery. Doesn't even have a 2,000 milliamp hour battery. But you know what? I'm getting 8 hours of screen on time on my daily usage here. And this is abnormal daily usage. My work schedule is completely different now because of coronavirus. I am playing games. I'm on my phone way more than I normally would have in a normal 9 to 5 work day. So I'm using the phone a lot, and I'm still getting 8 hours of screen on time. And I'm still, if I'm not playing games, if I'm not checking emails constantly, if I'm not doing all the stuff I need to do, I could probably stretch the battery life on this to 2 days on my usage. That's pretty damn impressive. It's not as good as the iPhone XR. Last year's iPhone XR was even better than this phone. But for such a small package and less than 2,000 milliamp hour battery in here, that is insane to think about. Once again, software optimization really is a huge deal when it comes to iPhones, and this is an absolute battery champ. It's a winner. It's not all good, though, because we still have the Apple proprietary charging port, the lightning cable, the dreaded lightning cable, which we all used to love, but at the same time, it is way past time for it to go to USB-C, and I do understand why they didn't do it here. It's a cheaper price point. A lot of people buying this probably did already have an Apple lightning cable from their previous iPhones, like the iPhone 6 and the 7s and whatever that they're upgrading from. But it is really time for Apple to be uniform. This MacBook has a USB-C. My iPad Pro has a USB-C. Come on, you kind of have to put your iPhones with a USB-C too. But fortunately, we do have Qi charging. That means I can just plop this onto a Qi charger and then can charge it. So I actually have not plugged in a lightning cable onto this phone at all. But for $399 and Qi charging included into this phone, that is a huge, huge win, because as Lita demonstrated in her OnePlus 8 video, the OP8 doesn't have Qi charging and it's $700. The excuse is that there's a higher version of the phone, the OnePlus 8 Pro, which is the flagship level phone, which has Qi charging. $399 doesn't matter. We still have Qi charging on this phone. So it doesn't matter how they classify this phone, mid-end, high-end, it has Qi charging, has the highest Apple processor. Huge win in my book. That's why I'm okay with this particular phone having the lightning port, because we do have Qi charging. Awesome. And then here is where a lot of people may find it difficult to potentially switch to this particular phone. We only have one camera here. In an age where we have like 4 camera sensors on the back of a phone, this iPhone SE only has one camera. It's a 12 megapixel f1.8 sensor, which shoots 4K up to 60 frames per second. So that is great that it does shoot 4K up to 60 frames per second. But camera experience on this phone, there's a little bit left on the table here, because while it's solid and it is better than a lot of mid-end Android phones that I've reviewed over the last 2 years or so in this price point, this phone's camera is not on par with even, in my opinion, the iPhone XR. And the iPhone XR's camera wasn't even that great to begin with. It was acceptable, it was fine, but we've used better cameras on this channel. But the absolute best fact about this phone is that it's $399, and it is essentially the iPhone 8 at half the price of what the iPhone 8 was when it came out MSRP. So that is absolutely a win. Just imagine that. If it was just a couple years ago and you bought the brand new iPhone 8 at half the price, that's exactly what we have here. Yes, the design is out of date, but I mean, come on, guys. Sometimes we do have to forfeit certain things in order to get the best value deal. And this is absolutely the best value deal. No doubt about it. Hands down, this is the phone I recommend for a majority of people out there. And that's crazy for me to say. I'm recommending an Apple phone for everybody to use. I'm probably sticking with this phone for a majority of time too for 2020. I just don't see myself using another phone over this one. This phone has really convinced me to stay on an iOS device for longer than that 3-week period that I usually use it for. And usually I am dying to go back on an Android phone now. I'm kind of dreading going to test out the other phones that I have in my storage right now ready to review, because I am so happy with this iPhone SE 2020 for all the reasons I stated that I'm just kind of dreading leaving it. But I'm Alex with Sitman Tech. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you guys think of the iPhone SE 2020. Is there any other phone out there that you even think can remotely offer the same value? I would love to hear your opinions on it. And if we've reviewed it already, let me know what you think of that. And I'll see you guys next time.
And that's it. Be sure to subscribe here. Hit the bell button so you don't miss any of our videos. And check out our other videos right here. Until next time.